Welcome back to Media7, where we're running the rule over the election campaign with the assistance of Jennifer Lees-Marshment, John Ansell and Bob Harvey. Now, we sent Simon Pound out to survey the most visible part of the Pitchfield vote, the hoardings. He found them not unmolested.
Now, political billboards get the most attention. Labour's are strong and crisp and cash in on nationalism and all the advertising they, as government, have been running about Kiwi Rail, Kiwi Saver and Kiwi Bank. Very clever. Nationals, on the other hand, have been slammed as cluttered, confusing and trying to do too much. But while billboards get the glory, what about the hoardings that take over your local reserves every 3 years? They can tell us a lot. Some are the same as billboards, some are a little odd, like this from United Future. You pay your taxes, you like the colour purple, you have really, really good eyesight to read that last line. But most of all, the hoardings are a site of political expression, through vandalism and graffiti. There is a lot of it about. Missing heads seem to be a theme this year, but is there a method? We at Media7 wondered, are there any themes from the campaign carried over in the protest media of graffiti? So here I am at Auckland's Cox's Bay. With this hoarding here and the graffiti on Jonky's face, I think we may have found a representation of what's wrong with the national billboards, where they're trying to fit too many messages in. You'll see that the graffitier has gone for a swear word, a body part, lines under the eyes, crow's feet, gaps in the teeth, and a beard. And in doing so, there's just too many messages. You can hardly even tell that there is also the classic cock and balls. While in stark contrast to this, a tale of two hoardings, if you will, we have the Labour billboard here, and the graffiti has kept with the theme of simplicity. They've just gone for the one classic cock and balls, and they haven't done too much to obscure the face. Strong messages, simple. Now, if we look at the ACT billboard, you'll see that in ACT's campaign materials, they've gone for a dingbat approach, where they've tried to communicate ideas through images as words. Now, I think it's confusing, but I like the way that the graffitier of this billboard has continued this idea of visually representing, but they are very careful to then spell out exactly what it is they are representing, which I think is quite something. Here we have a Green Party hoarding, which is entirely unmolested, which makes one suspect that perhaps the graffitier or graffitiers have Green Party sympathies. Well, whoever it was, they've injected some much-needed life into the campaign. But remember, kids, don't try this at home.
Simon Pound with that report. John, you said just before Simon said there, you said the Greens are doing it because theirs is the only billboards. But I think it's just purely that no one could bring themselves to defile that billboard.
They respect the Greens billboard. That's what taggers do, isn't it? They leave the good stuff alone.
Good billboard.
They respect
and go for it. I mean,
yes.
These just demand.
I must say, it's very tame up here in Auckland. Very tame up here. And I was down in Nelson, and there was a Nazi swastika on the national billboard. The Labour one was actually on the ground, and so was the Greens, actually, so we can't implicate the Greens in Nelson, but there's much more damage down there.
Yeah, I think that's alarming, the Nazi swastika. I haven't seen that for a long time. And I haven't seen the old scalpel knife coming out. But this time, we're seeing a lot of faces.
That's new,
missing.
yeah, the faces
I guess
missing.
they take them home and wear them, scare their wives.
Does this happen? Does this happen anywhere else, Jennifer?
I imagine pretty much all around the world you'll get a certain degree of it. I mean, I don't know what the percentage rates are, whether there's a lot more going on here this election. Maybe it's because voters aren't really happy. There's no one party really offering them what they want. I mean, the Green Party, getting away with it just because that's all touchy-feely. How could you, cut out a child's face? You couldn't do it. But the other stuff, the fact that there's so much on all the other parties, suggests a lot of discontent.
I would have done it to the little girl. I would have put "to be poor" underneath the vote for me. But there you go.
In terms of that kind of public commentary that's expressed through those parodies and through satirising billboards and ads, is that a good thing? Because your campaign kind of took on a life of its own in 2005, the red-blue billboards. You even had a website that was the National Party billboard generator, which wasn't always flattering to National, but was it still a good thing that you were in the conversation?
Well, I think so. I think the trick is to make ads that make news. It would be good if they made good news, but inevitably they won't always. There were 4,000 fake billboards on that site, and a fair number of thousand were anti, but at least they were using our frame of reference, I suppose. I was terrified in 2005 putting on my Labour hat, thinking, what would I do? I would have done the same thing back and then neutralised the whole thing.
You were so good
But they
last
didn't,
time. How come they fired you? I mean, why did you do that now?
They didn't fire me.
You walked away. You ran away.
They didn't quite win, though.
Okay, I need to know that.
It's hard working for politicians. They don't listen.
Well,
I'm
yeah.
a politician. I listen. Yeah, but your campaign was brilliant. It was just bloody brilliant.
I wonder sometimes when an advertiser has a property like the TUI, and the National Party was the political equivalent of that. Why they don't stick with it? You've also, apart from being a politician, you've been an advertising agent, and you would say that you stick with a winning campaign.
See, I was against Tamahiri last time, and
it didn't win. That's
No.
right.
I think, although you say you won the campaign, but you didn't win the
fair
election,
enough.
and they
Fair
probably
dues.
wanted a break with that.
Fair dues. Well, it wasn't the John Key brand, I suppose, but there's still some things you need to differentiate.
Yeah. Well,
Now, you briefly worked for ACT this year. You started developing an advertising campaign for them. I won't ask you what went on, but what do you think of what they're doing now? Because it seems all over the place.
That's what I think of it. Yes, that's why I left.
And in particular, there's the newspaper ads with the pictograms that Simon alluded to, which I found completely confusing. And then this thing of Rodney Hyde beaming as he delivers this
Message of zero tolerance on crime.
Message of zero
It doesn't
tolerance.
add up.
Yeah.
Communication's got to be clear, hasn't it? It's got to be simplistic.
I'm an ACT supporter, simplified. Always have been. Always always thought Roger Douglas was onto it. But I think that
right.
if you're a 2% party, you've got to spend every cent the same way with the same imagery and the same message. It seems to me if you stand for school...
They didn't even do it with the same spelling.
Yet.
they're so undisciplined, aren't
Well,
they?
if you stand for education vouchers, or as Rodney rather cleverly puts it, scholarships, send one to each household. Say, do you want 100,000 to educate your kids wherever you want or not? Climate change, you send them an invoice and say, send this amount to the Russians. That will get them.
So how would you pitch zero tolerance?
If you're
for
talking
crime?
stereo, I would put a picture of Graham Burton on there. He would be the spokesman. Not Rodney Hyde. I would say, present the problem.
Gallows.
Present the problem.
Yeah.
Well, it's the Willie Horton gambit,
The Willie
isn't it?
Horton, that's a famous campaign from the Republicans in America, which scared the living daylights out of them.
But does fear always work, though? Because isn't that a problem?
Well, it worked then, it works a lot. It worked in that terribly fraudulent campaign that was against Goldwater, wasn't it? The Daisy campaign where the little girl was picking petals off the daisy and then the nuclear bomb goes off and presumably...
But that was TV.
So does she.
But very effective.
But does it always work? Because doesn't it make voters think, well, they can't trust you either? So that sort of fear-mongering that Labour are doing with National, isn't it a problem? Because it makes voters feel like they perhaps shouldn't even bother going out and voting because there's nothing positive to support.
Well, I would argue that they won with fear last time. They won with taxpayers' money in the last week. They didn't have the money. They spent it illegally, but they did... Labour did a good campaign in the last week. They didn't do a good campaign for the rest of the campaign, but in the last few days they put the fear of God into people. Can you trust Brash sort of thing? And
Actually,
I think a lot of people went into that booth thinking, well...
So they're trying to do the
maybe
same thing
not.
again.
While we're talking about electoral spending, I did say we'd get to the Electoral Finance Act. I'm quite surprised. I went and looked. There are 25 people or groups registered as third parties under the EFA. Most of them are not going to spend anywhere near their $120,000. Family First is there. The Sensible Sentencing Trust isn't there. I can't understand why these people out of pique would boycott the system.
Too hard.
Why is it happening? It's not
Too
that
scared.
hard.
Too scared,
You say too
of
scared.
the consequences of the Electoral Finance Act, which are very severe. That's the way it was designed. It's worked perfectly from Labour, Greens, etc. point of view. It was designed to be so confusing that people would think, hell, if we do anything, we're going to get pinged. So I think perhaps we won't. And that's what's happened. That's why the Sensible Sentencing Trust haven't done anything.
Well, the other effect it's had is to make all the issues come out in the final campaign, and that means it's harder for National to communicate a clear, positive vision, in advance of the election, which is what most parties around the world do if they're going to sail into office and have a landslide victory. So it means they've got to try and put all their new policy in sort of 4 or 5 weeks. There's not enough time.
And of course, no one can afford to have policies now anyway. I think that's had an impact on the campaign. Well, no, because there's no way of paying for them.
Obama victory swing the deal, do you reckon? Here. Will that move? If Obama becomes the President of the United States, which is, 2 days before, the people on the day will do something that they're not going to do now.
I don't know. The only thing it might actually help National by pointing out that there is hope and vision and you can believe in things.
Yeah.
Whereas at the moment, Labour are probably counting on people not believing and not trusting and then frightened by the global crisis.
While we're talking about Obama, Labour is supposedly using Blue State Digital, who did all the genius work for them. I'm not really seeing it. In fact, I'm not seeing much creative use of the internet at all. The Greens clearly have a strategy. They've had a banner on my website for weeks.
I'm seeing
Labour, I thought, did quite well getting the This One's About Trust on the newspaper websites on the Monday morning after, but compared to, say, the Australian election last year, we're just not seeing it.
No, it's really bizarre. I mean, John Key has looked at using Facebook and other mechanisms, but it's all one way. They're not using the principles used so well in the States to galvanise their own supporters, galvanise new voters, and to enable two-way communication. They're just using it as another means to issue press releases. And if you look on both websites, you can click on Meet Helen Clark and Meet John Key, but you don't meet them. It's just a series of them telling you why they're wonderful.
I haven't seen
really
National on the internet. Are they on? Because it was
I gather
big mistake last time.
I gather they booked some inventory for at least the last week, but we're not seeing them yet.
Yeah,
and I'm really
how to do
surprised
it.
because it's cheap
I
advertising.
Active put it, there's knolls of things coming up, pop-ups coming up. I don't know about the other parties. But that doesn't mean Labour haven't got something planned, or National, but I suspect Labour
I think both the big parties have got something for the last week or two,
they've
but
got
I'm
very
surprised
clever
we haven't
plans.
seen
Maybe
it yet.
Obama's going to come out for Clark. Do you think that would be a bit of a victory?
No. I think I'll have other priorities.
They might take the view that Obama is on the left and therefore Helen, but I think they might see John Key as our Obama.
Yes, I think that's more likely.
That's more
So
likely.
in answer to your question, they might, but not the way you'd prefer.
Not the way.
Yeah, well, it is going to be quite an interesting week for the media all round when we have that big election across the water and our own one. Perhaps we'll have you back later on to discuss it. But that is, unfortunately, all we have time for this week. So thank you to our panellists, Jennifer Lees-Marshman, John Ansell and Bob Harvey, and thank you for watching. We'll be back with Media7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye.